Welcome to the Scotty P podcast, man. I'm here today with a good buddy of mine, Abraham La Montagne, the mountain. Yeah, man. Man, we've known each other for quite a while. We have the same sponsor, Eric the Defender, lawyer in Houston, Texas. If you have any problems with any accidents, criminal problem, like you get arrested, anything like that, call him. He's your guy. He gives back to the Jiu Jitsu community. He's always sponsoring athletes, and he sponsors me and you. So we spent quite a few nights competing at the couple 80cc opens, so we became friends that way.
Yeah, he recently started sponsoring Oliver Taza as well.
Right. Yeah, man, he's all over the place now. He's also sponsors Felipe Rocha, some guys for Fury. So definitely team defenders like stacking up, which is pretty dope. But yeah, man, we first met. You came to Houston about a year ago or so to visit. And we got to train at the dark side a couple times.
Yeah, I think it was almost like 2 years ago, almost. It was, I was in Houston for work at the time, and I was just looking for a no-gi gym. And then the only no-gi gym I could find was really dark side in Houston, so I just kind of went there. So that's where we ended up meeting up.
Yeah.
I just randomly just showed up on like a day, and I was like, hey, guys.
Yeah. And we had some good rounds. And I remember we stayed after for like an hour talking. So I felt like after that, we kind of were on the same wavelength, kind of like talking about philosophy. And you were one of my first podcast guests too.
For sure.
A year ago. I think you're like episode 4 or 5. But I really appreciate you coming on then too. I'm glad to have you back. But dudes, let's talk about kind of, man, since the last time I had you on, so much has happened. You're an 80cc open champ. You've medaled multiple times in both in your weight class and the absolute. So just in that year that we've known each other, or over a year, you've done a lot, man. So if you just kind of want to explain your journey so far.
Just last year, I think I probably was one of the most active competitors, I think, in jiu-jitsu in general, particularly using the 80cc open rule set as a means of, or not just the rule set, but the opens, to kind of achieve that. Like, a lot of these tournaments are extremely stacked. They'll have tons of people. I was able to do 87 competitive matches last year.
Jesus.
And I won, I think, 84% of them. And then I had a 64 or 65% sub rate. So I was just using that to kind of like track progress. And so my goal is to have a higher sub rate. Perhaps I can get more matches this year, maybe not. But you know, just kind of like, I view competition as a skill unto its own. I see a lot of people who might be even better than me or just really, really skilled, and they kind of fold under that pressure. So, you know, one skill I think that I've done a really good job developing is just how to compete, how to mentally go in there. And I think oftentimes tactics tend to be something that's very difficult for people to train in training, because they don't really have a conscious understanding or a conscious, deliberate pressure from training. Like, if you guys are into training, I feel like most people think of training as a sub-only match. Like, a lot of time I'll go to an open mat and no one cares if they get mounted, or they don't care if they get passed, or at least when I say they care, their actions don't depict them giving the same level of frustration of defending a pass or something. They'll more willingly just give it up. Be like, what's the worst thing that could happen? I'm just not going to let him sub me. But then you'll take their back, you'll mount them for the entirety of the round, but they're not going to feel the same sort of frustration with that as if like they were in a live match. If they're in a live match and I was up 20-0, they would be like, Jesus, he destroyed me. But then this is what people do. They'll be like, I went to an open mat, but he couldn't sub me. It's like, but I'm up 25. Like, in wrestling, probably the most humiliating way to lose is not getting pinned in the first 30 seconds. It's getting tech falled. If you get tech falled, which means to lose 15-0 at least, literally the worst thing. Like, you could get tech fault and then he pins you like at point 14. Yeah, that's probably the most embarrassing way to lose. So I'd say a large aspect of jiu-jitsu is control. I'd say the control is probably one of the most significant parts. Obviously, the control leads to submission, but that's kind of where I would go. I'd say, like, people don't train for that. And one thing that these opens do, these trainings do, is you get to learn tactics. You get to learn how initiations work, how points work, all of that, and how to pace yourself throughout a match. So you can't really like copy that in training as well. So there's a certain competitive mindset and tactic that goes in.
Yeah, you have to have a high level of skill to even kind of get to tactics and strategy, really, right? And then, that is one of the most frustrating things about rolling in like other people's gyms or just general practice rolling. Yeah, people don't care about the small things, right? Where it's like, if we're in a match, I'm gonna hip escape to exhaustion before I let you pass,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Whereas, you don't really see that in regular rolling. That's why I kind of like, for me personally, I don't mind the rough training, especially if you like, it's kind of understood going into the match. But I think like rape chokes are legit,
yeah,
face crushes, because
yeah,
one of
yeah.
the things that I think is important is keeping jujitsu honest, which means, if you let me mount you and you're just going to do this and just chill
Do
there,
nothing. Yeah.
yeah, that's the opposite of jujitsu,
Mhm.
right? So I think so usually a lot of times when I get to mount, someone just does this and they're just chilling. I'll start doing like rape chokes and stuff just to
Yeah.
keep them honest.
Yeah, within the like like that's a completely legitimate strategy. Just most people just get a little offended by it.
Yeah.
But it kind of like separates the hobbyists from like the true competitors. I'd say in the Roka room, like, in the private training for New Wave, like that stuff's 100% legit. But people will also punish you for over relying on that. Like if you just hyper focus on just extending and framing into their neck, you're going to be super off balance. It has a similar limitation and benefit in the way like Ezekiel's do. You end up overcommitting your arms to their neck, but you have no base to frame out if they want to like hip you off. So it's usually something just good to create movement. Same thing with smothers. Whereas in like an open mat, you can't really get away with that without people getting really offended. They'll be like, bro, what are you doing? And it's like 100% legal. Like, same thing with smothers. People get like offended because they're like, ooh, owie, this hurts, or oh, ooh, owie is like, but that pressure that they're feeling is to encourage them to move. And so it's kind of like one of those things. It's like, people getting frustrated with their own. So it's like like there's something to getting wrist locked all the time, let's say. Like if you put them in a position, you just kind of keep wrist locking them, they'll get frustrated similar to it, but it's like the most legitimate, illegitimate move. Yeah. Like they'll be like, this is so frustrating. It's like, why do you keep, it's like, well, because you're not doing anything. I'm educating you to your own faults. Yeah. You should move, buddy. Yeah.
Another one that frustrates me too is when people always want to move away from the wall.
Oh, I don't like the wall.
Yeah, I like the wall. I feel like, well, I guess it depends. If we're getting ready for competition, then there is no wall in competition, so we should probably stay away from the wall. But if we're just rolling and someone's like, we get near it and they're like, can we just reset in the middle? I'm like, come on, dude. Come on, the wall, there's walls in real life.
Yeah. I guess it just depends on if you're training for sport or training for fighting. Like,
true.
Most people train just for sport and fun. Like I remember one time, we'll have a lot of MMA guys come and train, and there was this dude who came and visited, and he was super explosive. And I just remember super athletic and just a physical beast. But, a lot of these guys who are like high level MMA fighters, you can still hold them down with jiu-jitsu because they're super reliant on strikes and stuff like that to kind of counter things. Or you'll realize that so much of their jiu-jitsu or their anti-wrestling or their wrestling defense, takedown defense, is actually reliant on using the peeling of the wall. Like they don't know how to use the mat like a wall. So what they do is they actually need a wall. And I was on this dude's back. We were doing like a turtle round or something, and I took his back pretty quickly. And he literally stood up. He walked over to the wall. We were probably like 30 feet away from the wall, and then just started scraping me off like a piece of gum. And I don't have experience dealing with wall work, so it was effective. But I was like, bro, like that was his whole defense, was getting up and running over to a wall and just scraping me off. And I was like, I guess that's legit, but didn't realize over there was in play.
Yeah. I saw someone posted one of their matches where he took this dude's back and the dude got up and like walked to the edge of the arena. So he had to reset it. It was like, dude, instead of trying to escape my back attack, just tried to escape the arena.
In some rule sets, it seems to be legitimate because you're not going to get called for stalling or fleeing for some reason, which is probably one of my biggest pet peeves in competing is refs don't see that as stalling or a fleeing tactic. I remember one match was pretty funny where the refs it was at an AGF, and they were actually doing a pretty good job kind of being like, dude, you can't just run away. I was in the gi, I think, and I maybe just had gotten my purple belt. No, I think this was in Oklahoma, so I still was probably a blue belt, but I was this asshole who wore a yellow Bruce Lee gi all the time. But I felt pretty good. I think this is actually, I fought what's his name? Name is like Nick. He's this judo guy, but it wasn't this match, but it was the same day. I fought this like Olympic judoka the same day, but like the match before that, I fought this guy and I did like an upside down reverse triangle, kind of like we were like 69ing almost, but I literally did like a triangle. I was hanging upside down like Batman or like Spider-Man, and I was like holding on to him, but I was just holding on. I think I had already gotten like a sweep to get on top from guard. and I was upside down the entire time, but I had my legs completely triangled around him. And he wanted to walk out of bounds to reset us, but the ref's like, you can't walk out of bounds. So I was up 2, but this guy was like bigger than me. I think it was the absolute or something like that. And I was literally hanging upside down, all the blood going to my head for 5 minutes. Jeez. And I was just sitting there. I was like, I know if I fall, he's going to probably get a sweep on me, and I don't want to deal with. I wasn't good enough at the time to reliably get another sweep or something. So I decided to just gas my hamstrings and just hold there. And so literally I was just hugging him upside down like this with my head right by his nuts and essentially hanging there. And dude, my hamstrings were so on fire after that. But I won. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, it was really
a
funny.
Recording of that match somewhere?
I don't think so. I think I might have pictures of it somewhere, but I'm just like sitting there and we're just kind of like talking to each other. He's like, you want to let go? No. I got like 2 more minutes. I'll be good.
That's hilarious.
It's a pretty funny match though.
Yeah. So, and then you have another very similar match, right? They went super viral with I think his name is Mihaj, but you had him like in the reverse close guard upside down.
Twice. Yeah, I fought Mia twice in Denver, and I think he was my first opening match. It's funny because we've been in the same bracket several times, but I think he just had something else or something like he'll sign up for the brackets, but maybe just something came up and he didn't show up, so I didn't know if we were going to fight that day. And then he showed up in Denver, and he was like my first match, and I caught him in my reverse close guard and A-blocked him in like the first minute or two. And so then to his credit, he comes and he fights his way back through the consolation bracket. I think I ended up losing to somebody else that day. The guy who ended up golding, I think, that day. And then what ended up happening was I also had to end up fighting for third. And so he fought his way back, beating everybody through the bracket, only to come fight me in the third place finals, I think. And then actually it wasn't the third place finals. It was one of the consolation brackets or something like that. But he had to beat literally everybody else to get back to me. And so I fought him again twice. And then I A-blocked him again from reverse close guard twice in the same day. And he was like, God damn me.
Dude,
so he was a good sport about it though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Yeah, man, that reverse close guard. Yeah, I feel like you kind of like made it a resurgence. Like all of a sudden now it's like people are using it all of a sudden.
Yeah, it seems to be the case. Like totally, I think Jeff Glover coming up with donkey guard was the original thing. I'm sure it's one of those positions that it's kind of weird to talk about ownership in jiu-jitsu of moves because you can't really own a move. It's funny because in science they actually do the same thing. There will be companies that will get patents over genetics. Like there will be like a specific gene that you can they'll patent and they'll say that they own, but you literally, everybody can have it inside their body. Like, so it's interesting that people will, I guess this goes to, there's something, I can't believe I can't remember the term for it, but it's essentially you can own knowledge, which is kind of an odd idea to own knowledge, because if I looked in my own genetics, I could find the same thing. But so too with jiu-jitsu moves, it's like the same thing. How do you patent knowledge when anybody can do that same thing?
Right.
So it's like you're forbidding people from essentially like performing an action with their body that anybody could do. But yeah, Jeff Glover came up with, I think, the original sighting of it. I think what I ended up starting to do was a little different because I think his was like donkey guard in the sense that he would go from like a 4-point and then jump onto people and then use it for kind of a different purpose. But, you know, it's similar in its like architecture, the way that the body is, whereas I would use it kind of exclusively from literally being in guard and then inverting into it and reversing through. A lot of sweeps, probably similar to what he does, but I don't think really anybody was going for like footlocks before I was doing it.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. So when he started the donkey guard, it was more known as like he would start with it as an entry into it. Yeah. Right. That's where it kind of came up with the name because he's like showing his ass and kind of
kicking like a donkey, like a donkey.
And then you, it seems like, I've seen you enter it from like a open guard position. I've also seen you, instead of like going to ashi or pummeling to a different leg entanglement, you just kick your leg out and around the waist.
Yeah.
And gobble the waist up, which is also interesting. You'd think that's like the opposite of what you would want to do. But
yeah, I think it's just another, there's like all the main leg lock entrance or positions outside ashi, cross ashi, reverse ashi, all these different entrances. I just think it's another one of them. I don't think it's like the best one. Like it's better than cross or anything. I think it has its merits. I think it's very good for control, but there's not as much leg drive as like say cross ashi. But I think it's the position that it's most similar to would be cross ashi. But instead of cross, like basically you use 2 legs to isolate one leg, you use 2 legs to wrap around the waist and isolate 2. Right. So it ends up being this like symmetric. It's like a cross between the similarities of 50-50 in its utility as well as cross-ashi. So you use two legs to dominate the body, but it's a symmetric position. So that's why I'd say it's like 50-50 in there.
It's only, well, it's not technically 50-50 though if you get, because they don't have access to your legs, right?
I'm stating that they can like, you can go into what's called double donkey or double reverse close guard.
Right.
That's why I'm saying it's like where the same sort of control that you can elicit on them, it's possible they can do it to you.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying there's equal danger of the feet, but you can clearly like catch each other in the same thing. And it's a very annoying thing to deal with because it's, you both have so much control that oftentimes it feels like it's just a stalemate. And whoever's willing to like kind of like let go of their feet is usually the one that's going to probably actually lose.
Yeah.
So it's a weird position. So how do you both get called for stalling in that position? Are you both going to get DQ? Like it's not obvious how a ref should handle that situation.
Have you came up with a way to escape it?
I have ideas, but to be honest, I'm still figuring it out. Like that's the cool and exciting aspect of kind of exploring a position. And like jiu-jitsu, there's so much more for us to explore. Like a lot of people can spend time with it. And, I know I'm not going to probably be the only one that's ever going to discover anything about this, but if you spend enough time in a position, you'll come up with new things and maybe other people will figure it out and maybe other people won't. So it's like, I'm sure right now, I don't think anybody's really come up with a really reliable way to deal with it. There are some ideas and stuff, but I think the best bet is just to kind of go over concepts of disconnection of triangles and stuff like that. So, but no, I don't have a great way of doing it. I mostly have preventative measures, I'd say, that are really, really reliable, but not in the middle. There's no good way. That's why it's so powerful, I think, is because you'll have all these people looking in that position, but it's not as simple as, you just take this leg and unwrap it like with many other positions.
Right.
Because you don't have access to the legs. Like the lock is like hidden behind your back. And even if you can't really reach it with your hands without exposing your face or your feet. It's very frustrating.
So I learned the smother choke from you, and that's like one it's so funny. Yeah, you feel like you have like your repertoire of moves, then you learn something new. I'm telling you, dude, I attempt to smother choke everyone, at least attempt.
Yeah.
And I land it so much, it's almost like not even fun because it's like that powerful.
Well, it's a staple, like, you know what I mean? Like, I can't own that. Honestly, I remember, I think it's like weird things like that where, like you were saying earlier with the rape chokes and stuff like that, it's a move that was completely legal. And it was funny because I remember when I was training as like a blue or a purple belt, like into my first or second year into training, that's like one of those things people are like, bro, you got to chill. You're being an asshole. Like, you know what I mean? But I'm like, but logically, it doesn't make sense why you would frown upon it, because I'm like, what's illegal about it? But there's also like, I don't think, like, this is going to be a stupid segue, but like tickling, for example, is not illegal, but you'd be like, bro, you're an asshole. But if someone came out with like tactical tickling and made it work, I guess if it was a high enough person, you'd be like, I guess we're tickling now. You know what I'm saying? But smothers was one of those things I remember, you would do occasionally because you get frustrated in top mount position from a no-gi setting, and you'd be like, dude, I got to create some movement. Nobody's doing anything. But I remember in the context before, when I was just some dumb blue belt trying to do something like that, I had coaches like kind of reprimand me, be like, you can't do that. But then I think the second week I was training with John, we literally learned a class on how to smother people. And I was like, this is so that's like one thing that's like different, is he will go into those areas that I think most people will kind of consider taboo or assholey like territory. And he'll be like, no, this is completely legitimate. You should be training this. And if you don't, it's kind of silly. It's not threatening really either. You're not going to get hurt doing it. It's just uncomfortable. So it's like, and what are we doing in jiu-jitsu if we're trying to avoid discomfort?
Yeah.
Like, so it's like, oh, what's the worst that can happen? Oh, it hurt. I don't like it. It's scary.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
yeah. Vic says it sometimes, and I agree with him, but he's like, there's no dick moves. There's only dick speeds.
Yeah. I've heard that before. Like, there's only asshole speeds. I've heard that too.
Yeah.
Like, asshole intensities.
So like another thing too, a move that might be frowned upon, but all the top guys are doing it, is face crushes. If you go train with the best guys, they're almost never looking for your throat. They're just going over the face, and if you give them the throat, they'll take it.
With mandibles and stuff.
Yeah, like, mandible chokes.
Variations. Well, the funny thing about mandibles is if you do them correctly, you do strangle people. It's just, it's considered an indirect strangle, where essentially if you're doing it correctly, their jawline is going to be connected to their mandible. And then what happens is that as you elicit pressure on the jaw, it goes through the head to the neck. That's the idea. But you'll have some of these gosh dang gorillas that come out and they will just literally rip your face. But I'd say with proper technique, it not only crushes your face, but it will also put pressure on your neck. It does strangle. It's just kind of a slower strangle, where I'd say in most strangles, they'll take about 6 to 8 seconds to occur, and get the whole, dizziness and the whole, the fuzzy feeling, you know what I'm saying? Whereas I would say probably a mandible strangle is like 10 to 12 seconds. So I think the problem is in the heat of the moment, most people, they trade intensity for focus. So rather than staying about 60 to 80% strength and then gradually increasing, they just want to win that championship, that title, that match against that one guy. And they'll go 100% and they can't hold that longer than 6 seconds. And by 10 seconds, their arms are gassed or they're discouraged. And they're like, okay, move on to the next thing. He's defending it too well.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, face crushes are very painful. They suck. I've had my teeth brushed with some dude's forearms a time or two, and it's not fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I just it cracks me up that it's not something that you're ever taught, but if you look at some of the top matches, people are using them. So it's like it's one of I do them to people. I'll face crush a white belt in a heartbeat, but it's like I give them time to tap, and that for me that should be plenty. It's like if it hurts, you tap.
Yeah.
So it's like, what are we complaining about here at the end of the day?
Yeah. I mean, it's just, there's like the thing about jiu-jitsu is that there are some moves that you understand are mostly just pain taps. And like, I won't tap to them if I know there's like, okay, I'm like, there's a certain number of things that you have to have. Like if you're not directly on my neck and you're just trying to crank my face, assuming that I don't feel like my neck is really that hurt or anything like that, I would never tap to them in competition. It's just.
Oh, I feel like if you were on your back, you'd probably tap to you face crushing you.
Oh, it would hurt, but in competition, I would fight like hell. It's one of those things, I'm saying this while not having someone strangling my face or anything like that. But it's if I'm making a conscious decision, I'm completely in control of the conscious decision to not do it. There would be no real motivation to do it beyond just pain. But if I knew that there was a minute left, a guy's on my back, and I'm in the ADCC championships, and essentially all this dude has is a face crush, I'm about to win ADCC because there's no way I'll literally let him break my neck like before I do that. Like it'd be one of those situations, you know what I'm saying?
I feel like people like Luke Griffith though. I feel like he'd crack your teeth. Like
he would do it. Yeah. Definitely, I could say he has that potential.
Yeah.
But that's like that. But see, the thing is you're talking about sustained damage. If I knew that there was a real long-term threat to like damage, it's one of those things. But if it's one of those instances where a guy is just squeezing me, and you know that there's really no angle or leverage that is sufficient to actually incur real damage to you.
Yeah.
Like I'm exaggerating when I say, oh, I'll let him break my neck. But if he legitimately was going to break my neck, I'd be like, all right, you got it.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? I don't want to actually get injured, especially if it's like kind of a lesser competition. But if it was ADCC championships and you're about to become a legend and be that guy who beat this dude or something like that, you'd be surprised probably what you'd be willing to sacrifice. Like, I mean, you see some people that will literally let their whole knee just get absolutely decimated to win something. Like, I think we've all seen Ruotolo versus Meow, and literally just absolutely the most disgusting knee bar I've ever seen. And the dude's like, legs don't work. And but he won, and that was a big deal. And a lot of those guys make their careers off moments like that. So it's like, as opposed to technique, it's like extreme mental toughness in those moments. And sometimes mental toughness is the technique.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, so dude, you have a background in, I think you said, what is it, chemistry or biology?
Biochemistry.
Biochemistry.
Yeah, but naturally when you do, you have to study biology and chemistry.
What did you end up getting?
I was, I went all the way into a PhD program. I was in the PhD program for about 3 to 4 years. Ended up mastering out in the middle of the PhD program when COVID happened. It was just one of those situations where you go pretty deep into it, COVID ends up happening, and then they kind of pause your research. So I had already done everything necessary to get my master's by that point. I was in the middle of, I'd already passed what's called a general exam, where you go from being essentially a PhD student to becoming a PhD candidate, which is like a full-fledged, like you're in the program for the PhD program. You've done all your necessary fundamental coursework, and now you get to be like an independent study guy, and all you're doing is trying to push your research forward. And then basically what you do as a PhD student to get your to get your PhD is you have to essentially discover something or prove something, and by writing a paper or two. That's what papers are supposed to be, is, hey, look, I've legitimately contributed to science as a whole. Here's 1 or 2 things. That's kind of what it is. I never got to the point where I was able to actually contribute to things in like a massive way. I actually am published, but ironically, it's in physical chemistry. But that was from my undergrad work, where basically I was on like a paper with like 50 other people, but we all did computational chemistry, where we did computer simulated models for inorganic chemistry. And so basically you look at the thermodynamics of like chemical reactions that are happening at the molecular level, and we contributed in a larger project. So technically I'm published in that way, but ironically not in the field that I actually studied. So it was one of those cool things.
Yeah, when you say like thermal energy, I was thinking like mitochondria or something.
Yeah, no, mitochondria. Yeah.
The powerhouse of the cell.
The powerhouse of the cell. Everybody remembers that from biology class. They like, because they pound that into your head. It really is the powerhouse of the cell. Kind of the cool thing about mitochondria that a lot of people don't realize is it's like a separate organism from you. It's not a parasite. It has a symbiotic relationship with you, but it has its own DNA. And there's actually this really interesting phenomenon that you can have 3 parents technically. So in some people who have like mitochondrial based diseases will have like bad mitochondria. So what ends up happening is you could have a father who donates sperm and a mother who donates the cells, but then the mother will have like a cell that essentially has bad mitochondria in it. And so what they'll do is they will take like essentially a zygote will have a nucleus that has the mix of the mom and the mom and the dad's DNA. But then they need to extract that nucleus and then put it into a different cell, because the cell is like essentially the area that has all the mitochondria in it. But if you have a mitochondrial based disease, what they'll do is they'll take the two original parents' DNA and they'll put it into a different cell that has healthy mitochondria. So you'll have a mom and dad who gave you your genetic DNA, but you'll have another mother who donated the mitochondrial DNA. Or the new mitochondria. So you have a mitochondrial mother. So technically you have 3 parents that contributed to your body in that way. So yeah, it's kind of weird.
Hey, Tori, who's that scientist that's always on Lex Friedman and stuff?
Huberman?
Huberman, yeah, he was talking about the mitochondria. And I guess he originally started as a biochemist.
Yeah, he's like does like neurobiology. It's funny. I met him randomly in a parking lot. Like I went up to him, I was like, "Oh, nice to see you." Like, it's cool. I feel like that's how Austin is like I feel like you're like on a YouTube channel. Yeah, like you're just kind of like surfing around and you'll run into like some big name like Lex Friedman or Andrew or something like that. So kind of funny.
Yeah, and he was talking about when he first started that everyone assumes mitochondria is like a part of the cell, but it's not. But he was bringing it up. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's weird because it's like it's called an organelle, and an organelle is basically like if you thought of a cell as a single body, like a human body, they would compare it to like a kidney or a heart or a lung. But imagine if like your lung was like a little tiny animal that lived inside of you and just gave you something. That's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
So what's really interesting is if a long time ago, some ancestor cell basically ate a mitochondria thinking it was going to eat it as food, but there was some mutation that was inside this cell that allowed it to sustain its like to not kill the mitochondria.
Right.
But then there was also some random mutation within the mitochondria to not like want to get out of it. So they just kind of ended up developing this symbiotic relationship, I guess, over time. And then that cell went on to just continue to develop. And then they have this relationship where mitochondria, to my knowledge, can't live independently of the cell. They are reliant on the cell. So essentially we feed them glucose and then they give us ATP. So, and ATP is the currency of the cell. Like, so adenosine triphosphate, basically all the cellular, mechanisms and everything are fueled by the use of the phosphate groups that are on ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. And then there's adenosine diphosphate and adenosine monophosphate, all that kind of stuff. Which is actually kind of funny, kind of a segue. I might have talked about this on the previous podcast, but that's related to how caffeine works. That essentially caffeine serves as an adenosine inhibitor, like receptor inhibitor. So essentially, as you accumulate adenosines, meaning you expend phosphates, you will have an adenosine left over. And as you accumulate adenosines, they will bond to parts of your brain, I believe, which are receptors for adenosine. And they will tell you, hey, you're really tired right now. And so caffeine has a similar like molecular shape to adenosine, and they will block the ability for your body to bind to adenosine. So it's not that it gives you energy, is that it inhibits your ability to perceive tiredness. And so what will happen is your body will build a tolerance to this, because believe it or not, feeling tired is actually like important. So what they'll do is that your body will increase the number of adenosine receptors, and then it'll make it so that when you feel tired, it's even more extreme when you do perceive it. So your body can hold more adenosines at a time, which means you'll have an even stronger response. That's why you always have to drink more coffee each time you do it. If you drink coffee every day to get the same feeling, you have to increase it. But if you were to cut out coffee, it'll suck for like a day or two, but then your body can like reset and be like, hey, this is a little much. So that's kind of how it works. So it's all related to ATP and caffeine and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because of mitochondria, I got to get a job.
You got to get a job.
Yeah.
Well, because of mitochondria, you also get to exist.
You
would be more than
I guess it's an even
like, because essentially, otherwise you'd be a single-celled organism, and your little single cell will just be eating like bacteria and poop. Yeah. So that's pretty much what you do.
Yeah, there's this hilarious meme of like one of the fish walking out of water.
Yeah.
And someone like shows a fist and it's like, because of this motherfucker.
I have to get a job. Yeah, that's pretty funny.
Yeah, dude. So this is one of the questions that I wanted to ask you on the last podcast. But so how would you say your scientific background has like helped you in jiu-jitsu? Because you've only been training for about 4 or 5 years.
4.5, yeah.
Yeah, 4.5.
And it'll be like 5, I think, in June. Like June 19th, I think, was the day I started jiu-jitsu. Like really, because I had tried like a club back in the day, but I was only part of the club for like a month. It was like one of those things where I like tried it. It didn't really work out. And then I was like, I guess I'll just do bodybuilding or powerlifting now. And then, I wrestled a little bit in high school and stuff like that growing up, but never really into like submission grappling or anything, But how science has kind of helped it, I feel like when I was like 25 is when I started to really build a lot of my core confidence of today. It's kind of like where I feel like a lot of like we all remember being like some dumb 16-year-old or something like that. And, I'm saying dumb because relative to I think what I am now, and I'm sure I'm a dumb 30-year-old now. And like 10 years from now, I'll be like, oh, that was a dumb 30-year-old and I didn't understand everything. And I'll hopefully become wiser, right? Like we all should. But you didn't really have much to you. I remember when you were in the Marines, I remember when I was in the Army, the only thing that I had interesting about me was I was in the Army at one point. I had nothing else. I had no confidence. And so my entire personality was, Abe's a dude in the Army. I maybe had like smaller things, but I wasn't good enough in any skill to stand out quite yet. So I leaned on my experience of that time, which is basically, hey, I had gone to boot camp. How cool. But then as I went through college, I started to accumulate skill development in like other fields and other parts of my life and get new experiences. So I became more multidimensional as a person. But then I had developed these skills of athletics and different types of things until I got to a point when I was 25, I got my college degree. I had a biochemistry degree. I had more military experience. I got out of the military in 2017 and I had other things where I started to kind of feel like a well-rounded person, but I had basically went through like a life boot camp in a way that when I first went to Oklahoma, I felt like I got to be independent and kind of challenged to be like, it's kind of like you go through like Green Beret or Special Forces training, and then you're on your first mission. Like, yeah, you got all these things. Can you really start a fire? Can you really do that? But then I'm dropped in the middle of the jungle of Oklahoma as like a life jungle. And then I'm like challenged to try to figure things out on my own. I don't have my family to lean on. I don't have my past relationships to rely on. I have only, Abe, you got to make friends. You got to figure out how to do it. And it was kind of cool because I feel like out of that situation, I was able to kind of turn lemons into lemonade. I got to learn a few languages. I started going into the PhD program and I kind of started to really feel smart for the first time because I was like, oh, hey, I can do this. Like, I started getting into the PhD program. I was like, okay, I can learn. Like one of the skills you learn in pursuing a PhD, if you're in like, I think particularly a STEM field, is you learn how to learn. Like that's what, if that skill more than anything, more than just mitochondria is the powerhouse of your cell, is you learn how to learn. And especially in a STEM degree, they force you to have to be logical. I think maybe in other degrees, you can kind of get wishy-washy. You can say, oh, feelings and blah, blah, blah. But you really...
Damn liberal arts degree.
Well, I'm telling you, like, it's like they have their uses and stuff in the humanities, but oftentimes I think, to quote my mom, put the emphasis on the wrong syllable. Like they don't quite like push the idea of being objective and logical to the way that many STEM degrees do. I think this is why we look at someone like John Danaher and why he's able to be so poignant with his logic and smart and objective is because he literally has like a philosophical background where he had to be objective. And I don't remember the exact field that he studied, but he studied like a very specific type of logic that I think has no room for error, right? It's like one of those, it has to be very specific. And I think something like a STEM degree will also push that sort of thing. Like I can't be wrong in my science and expect to publish a paper and then have people take it seriously. Same thing with jujitsu. There's an ability to experiment and form hypotheses, like when developing a new technique or verifying if something's good. Like, for example, the concept of high percentage techniques. You have high percentage techniques that why do we consider a rear naked better than like a wrist lock? Obviously, both can legitimately tap most people, or not most people, I'd say. Wrist lock is a lower percentage, but a rear naked, more reliable. But if you were to have 100 situations where each one are used, you'll find that the rear naked is consistently more reliable than the wrist lock. And you could even get into the deeper aspects of why one would be better versus the other. But that's experimentation. You look at the data, you're like, that one's better. And then if you're doing that, you're like, if I'm trying to develop core skills, you'll use the skills that are the most reliable. And so then you develop fundamentals, and out of fundamentals emerge style and all these other things, where I feel like oftentimes today, most people choose style first and then fundamentals later, if ever. So meaning like it's better to be kind of well-rounded at everything and then let your body, personality, and all that other stuff kind of like show you what you're good at because you know a little bit of everything, rather than I just want to be a guy who's good at wrist locks. Why? Because it's different. Well, you ever think maybe there's a reason, is because it's inherently a weaker path to success, right? If even a real path to success. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's funny. Style, one of my favorite quotes is style is excellence of the fundamentals.
Exactly.
Right. So it's like, yeah, style and fashion. Like you can't just have a style and fashion. You got to know fashion before you have a style, right?
It's
the same thing.
It's like there's a Mark Twain quote where I'm probably going to butcher it, but he's like, first get the writing. Like he's like basically saying, he's like, first you got to learn how to write, and then you can break the rules.
Right.
That's kind of, I was like, but there are all these people I'd be like, so why'd you put a semicolon there? That's just how I do it. And I'm like, but he doesn't even know how to use a semicolon. You know what I'm saying? And I'll be like, okay. And it's like, they'll be like that. So it's like, you must first get it right, then you can break the rules, or you can do whatever you want.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like, if you don't know how to write, why can you, how do you feel like you can be creative?
Right. Yeah. Same thing in like jiu-jitsu, you get these rules for like white belts, blue belts to learn fundamentals, right? So like a straight arm's a broken arm. That's like a rule, right? Don't straighten your arm out. You're going to get hard.
Yeah.
But for sure, as you get really good, you can straighten your arm whenever the hell you want.
Yeah. Because you're rotate out of it.
Yeah.
All kinds of stuff.
Because you're aware of how to break it and manage it and all that stuff. So it's always funny how those two things relate. So yeah, you talk about how learning how to learn kind of helped your jiu-jitsu progress. And then I also feel like, because you brought up Danaher earlier, and I think no one's confused here, but Danaher and the New Wave team have been a huge part of your success.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I feel like, I think maybe you told me this, but like just the way that you learn, that's pretty much how Danaher teaches. Or it's just you found the way that you see things, you felt like the way that he teaches is like the best.
Well, I think it's just the most optimal for the current way it is. I'm sure there are like even better ways through time that we'll discover that, hey, you can optimize things, but I think he has the most optimal approach to things currently. And it's kind of funny, like when you're in the room, it's like you have a well duh like moment, like a lot, like you feel pretty dumb because you'll be training in this Unga Bunga style approach a lot of time, and you have these like very bro-y approaches. Yeah, so what you do is you take a Kimura and you really crank the hell out of it, and like you're like, crank the hell out of it is just not the apt word to use all the time, right? So essentially, it's funny because sometimes it is for some guys. They tune into that gorilla unga bunga like type thing, and some people are very successful. But I'd say the majority of people, if they can adhere to some sense of logic and have some sort of patternistic language that they can adhere to, a more objective approach would just be more sufficient. It would be better. It's more consistent, right? Some people, I think, will get bored with it, but I think it's awesome because they typically lack the linguistic technical understanding that is necessary to break down information over time. But I think that just comes with I don't know if it has to be a formal education, but maybe people who don't educate themselves sufficiently to the art of language. Like language is so important, but if you don't have like essentially some ability to articulate and to perceive other people's articulation, you're literally going to lose the ability to focus on key details. If essentially, we kind of joke about people who have like kind of a poor linguistic skills and they can't really communicate themselves well, but there's a reason behind why a broad ability to communicate is favored. It's not just, oh, this is how you sound fancy, but it's how you also understand deeper, sophisticated ideas. Like there are so many, you can take like something like beauty, right? Like the concept, pretty, gorgeous, what's some other like,
Beautiful.
yeah, beautiful, sexy, like all of these things have different meanings and intensities. You can't just use pretty, beautiful, and gorgeous at the same level. They have a specific level of intensity associated with them. And if you didn't have the linguistic understanding associated with each of them, like you wouldn't be like we could look at strength, weak, powerful, sturdy. What else could you say? Like beast, like you're not beastly, like these extraordinary, like you could go in here and you could talk about these different things. But if you didn't have an ability to kind of stratify something and really do it, and you just thought strong meant always super strong or not that strong or medium strong or whatever, you wouldn't be able to really see the pattern of what person is going. You can't follow the path truly. You know, you have a very broad view of it, but as opposed to a very specific understanding of something, right? Which is kind of necessary with understanding a deeper level of language. But as I was saying earlier, it's like being at like New Wave with like John and stuff. It's funny. I remember I went up to him one day and I was like, "This is like a PhD program for Jiu Jitsu," and he's like, "That's exactly what I'm trying to do." And it's like it was just kind of funny because there are like these upper students and stuff like that. They're like the PhD assistants, kind of like it's almost like they already got their
Like Taza?
well, yeah, you could be like a lot. Taza, Gordon, all these guys. Like John's clearly the head professor; he's the boss. But then there's like these other guys that are like working on their they're called postdocs and PhD programs, where basically they're like people you can go to that know a ton. They've already got their PhD and everything like that, and you can go in and you can ask them questions and stuff, and they even will teach class sometimes and stuff. Whereas like I'm like a PhD candidate, I'm a PhD student where I'm aspiring to become maybe a postdoc one day and maybe run my own lab, right? That's how it was when I was in grad school, but you're going to be here for years. Like, so I think something that is interesting about New Wave is I feel like, and maybe this is just extends to my opinion on what does it mean to get a black belt, is I think black belts should be very rare. And I think that it's like getting a PhD in jiu-jitsu. And I see a lot of people who will get black belts, and I don't think they have the level of understanding to say that they have the same academic understanding of jiu-jitsu that a black belt or that a professor at like a college would of their craft. Like the people who have to get PhDs in a specific science degree, like or math or something like that, have such an in-depth, deep understanding of their craft that if literally they're also called professors, jiu-jitsu people have. I think if to get the title professor should also be expected to have the same level of depth. But most of the time, it's not the case. They're hobbyists that have like a basic understanding of arm bars and they can beat up blue belts locally and they don't compete. So, and then they're a professor. So to me, that seems kind of strange. And I think that the sport, to protect itself and develop in future, should be very specific about who gets a black belt. It's just my opinion. I don't think it's going to happen. You know, I'm cynical in that way. I think people are going to keep giving out black belts, and there's probably nothing I can do about it. But I think specific individuals whose opinion will matter more in the future can limit the ability to give out black belts, and that's all you can do. I think getting a black belt from like John or something is considered like the most prestigious like black belt you could get, but it's also super hard to get. So that's part of why. But people know that, oh, if you're a purple belt from this team or that team, that's a big deal. Whereas if you just say you're a black belt from so-and-so Bobby blah, blah, blahs, they'll be like, oh, that's cool. You know what I mean? But they won't have the same sort of ooh factor that goes in with the whole deal. So that's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, me and Tori were talking about Dan and her on the way up here. She was asking me questions about it, about like why it's getting watered down. And, you know, I told her it was because they've essentially, it's business. Business has
100%.
watered it down. Right? They used to only be white and black belt. It's like, imagine not getting all those little pats on the shoulder. So they added colors to make it more profitable. Well, before I told her, you know, before there was even a belt system, it was only taught in private lessons. There wasn't even a group class. It was just the only way you could learn is one-on-one with an instructor. And the only way they were allowed to teach is by a strict adherence to like an exact like sheet formula, of what Helio Gracie wanted you to teach, right? Yeah, like exactly like on a what do you call those? Like a piece of paper teaches you like exactly
like
what
instructions.
Yeah.
Like they had a particular format to it, which isn't a wrong approach, but the problem is that the problem to like that near limitation is that although it's probably like everything they knew, like broken down into a system, which is good. There is so much more that there was, and that if you follow and you just adhere to their system, at least early in that stage, like for example, like you limit yourself to adding in new things, I guess, if they don't encourage that behavior early on. So it's like there's a balance between creativity and fundamental understanding. And so this is where style versus fundamentals comes from, is that some people want to be creative right at the get-go, but they don't even know how to use a paintbrush. They want to paint a picture, but they don't even know how to like mix paint yet, or they have no idea of color theory. They have no idea how to like draw a straight line or do anything correctly, but then they want to go immediately into style. Whereas if you're just focusing on fundamentals, you're painting boring pictures. You're just doing like, oh, I've seen this 1,000 times. Great. Armbar. Like every time you get a sub of the night, what is sub of the night? It's some crazy flying armbar or some weird thing. It's never like, wow, that guy had a really clean Kimura. Like we don't reward clean Kimuras like for sub of the night. We reward the crazy, amazing feats of, wow, I've never seen that before. That's usually where it comes from. So yeah, but I believe the actual, and I believe if you look at, I can't remember which Gracie it was, but I think it might be, Holler?
Holes?
No. The one who was in the UFC. I can't believe I can't remember.
It wasn't Hoist.
Hoist Gracie. He does the blue. He has the little blue stripe when he goes into jiu-jitsu, but that's because originally there was only instructor and student. There was no ranks.
Right.
So the original instructors were a blue belt, and then I believe the students were all white. Like, so essentially that's where they like have the little blue tab on their belts, is to kind of like give a shout out to, hey, look, this is what it used to be like. So it used to not even have belt ranks. And I think probably they just got the idea from other martial arts.
Exactly. They got it.
Yeah, I think judo and karate and all these other things had belt systems. And
then they added the belt systems, and then they added the stripes after that.
Yeah, it's definitely a monetization thing, I think. Yeah. It's not bad to mark progression, but the problem is there's no universal indicator of this is what a 3-stripe purple belt is. And I'm sure that people have made attempts, but the sport is so fastly growing currently that you see such aspects of inequity between players today. Like there are some people who don't even know leg locks, but they're black belts. It's astounding. But maybe they got their black belt at a time when legs really weren't a thing, or they were banned, or this other idea that if you're a black belt in gi, you're also a black belt in no gi for some reason. Like I remember when I first got my purple belt, I remember this Brazilian came up to me. He's a nice guy. I'm not going to say his name, but he was just like, he came up to me. He's like, did you get your purple belt in no-gi, or did you get your purple belt in jiu-jitsu? And I was just like, oh, jiu-jitsu. And he's just like, yeah. But at the time I went to an all no-gi school. And so my professor at the time had given me a purple belt. So it's naturally, he thought of them as two different things. But this same dude promotes his students to like brown and black belt and stuff. But it's assumed that they're also no-gi like black belts and no-gi brown belts. But then I remember that day I went in there and I started knee barring all his newest brown belts and black belts in no-gi or in the gi. I would go into the gi and I was knee barring people. And I'm like, so what does that mean? I'm using all my no-gi skills in gi. So am I not? It's confusing and not obvious to people if you don't train in the gi very much. So kind of a strange comparison.
Yeah. And it's funny, my coach showed me this a long time ago, and then I was just telling Tori about how like Danaher's even changing that, how he's even changing the standard of what belts are. So I remember my instructor, like we were just talking about in general, when people complain that they should be the next belt, his idea is like, you shouldn't be the next belt unless you can confidently say you're the best in the world at that belt. It's like if there's someone else at that belt that's not promoted yet, why do you think you deserve the promotion over him? So don't even think that you deserve it.
I don't even think he really thinks belts are important. I've heard him say it several times. He's like, it's kind of like the wrong focus. It's like, and he's right. Like 100%. At the end of the day, you just want to get promoted because you want to be acknowledged for sort of like your skill level and everything, which isn't unreasonable if you put enough time into it, but it's not the most important aspect of learning jiu-jitsu. Most important aspect of learning jiu-jitsu is not so you can go to tell some babe at the bar, hey, I'm a brown belt, I'm a black belt. It's, I'm really freaking good. Like, and you can confidently go into a match and be like, I don't care if I'm a blue, purple, whatever, I'm going to sub this black belt right now. And you'll see all these people who have the title black belt, but they'll enter these ADCC tournaments and then you'll see blue and purple belts winning the whole title. So you're like, well, what does that mean? It's it's their lack of skill development. And you could say that these people don't deserve to be black belts, or you could say that these people deserve the black belts, but the standard for what a black belt is so much different than what it used to be. in a academic program, it's very interesting. If you look at what it took to get a biochemistry PhD 150 years ago, 100 years ago, they had to basically do like 1/20th of like what a PhD has to know today. They had to be like, hey, look at a cell under a microscope and make a picture of it. And that was like their entire thesis project. They're like, bing, look, I took a good picture of a cell. That's like day one stuff, like in a modern PhD program. Today, you have to like not only take a picture of a cell, you have to take a picture of this cell, thousands of other cells, look inside of it, categorize all the different organelles inside the cell. Also, come up with a new method that helps treat cancer in addition to doing all this other stuff. And it has to be on a novel virus type or a novel cell type that nobody's ever looked at before. Like you have to have such a greater depth of understanding. But that's because academia and the STEM programs have been pushed so much that in order to contribute to the larger, greater amount of knowledge as a whole, you have to have some ridiculous level of understanding of a very specific field to contribute. That's how much we know about it, right? But changes, it's like science moves pretty fast, but as a whole, as we learn more, there's less to be discovered, right? You know what I'm saying? Or less fundamental things that are like absolutely going to change the game. Like you're not going to discover that DNA doesn't exist. DNA exists now. We have a fundamental understanding of DNA being a thing, right? There's obviously going to be new innovations. Maybe the nature of how we understand DNA could change, or the nature of how the cell works could change. But I'd say overall, we have a current practical understanding of how these things work together. And the fact that we're able to innovate on top of our fundamental knowledge shows that we have enough of a fundamental understanding to how these things work that we can operate around them. We can treat diseases. We can create new innovations and change DNA and do all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? The fact that we can create practical applications proves its effectiveness of our understanding. Whereas like 500 years ago, I remember I read a paper once where they were talking about making fake blood, like how to make fake blood. And these guys had no idea how to create fake blood. They didn't even know what blood was made of. They had no idea what bacteria was. They didn't know what cells were. They had no idea. But they're like, we know people will die when they lose blood. What can we do to replace blood? So they knew how to inject stuff into people. So they would put all kinds of weird stuff and then they replace them with water. They replace them with beer. They replace them with pee. They replace them with milk. Like they were imagine dying of blood loss or something like that. And they were putting pee inside of you. That was like a thing. They're like, fuck it, try it. Or beer or water or, you know what I mean? And they tried putting other people's blood in it, but they had no understanding of blood types. So it was like super inconsistent. They're like, I guess it'll work sometimes, but sometimes it doesn't. And so it must be magic as to the reason why it doesn't work. So, but that's what I'm saying. We have a practical understanding of it now that we can give people reliably new blood and we understand how to make, save someone under those conditions. But that's only because we have such a fundamental understanding of blood types and cells and all these other things, right? Whereas if you tried this way back then, they would have thought it was witchcraft or some BS or not real. In that way.
As opposed to martial arts, it's kind of, as you could argue, it's the opposite, right? Where it's like over time, it's gotten easier to get a black belt than the other way, right?
I think it should get harder. It's
the opposite of what you're saying.
Because there's no system that holds legitimacy behind the titles. I think it's like today, a purple belt or a blue belt has the same level of understanding of jiu-jitsu as a black belt from like 50 years ago. Like I honestly think if you had one of like the older black belts from like the 50s, first off, in the 50s, triangles weren't even part of the game. Like imagine you would be such a game changer if you went back to 1954, you fought a Gracie and you used triangles on them. They'd be like, what is this? I think the triangle only was introduced into jiu-jitsu in like the 70s or 80s. It's like, that was a huge game. Like triangles are such a big part of the game now. Imagine getting mounts and then doing a mounted triangle. They'd be like, what is this? You know what I mean? The Kimura was a big deal at one point, because Kimura did Kimuras to people. And that was crazy. But those are like the fundamental innovations that we take for granted now. And 50 years from now, leg locks will just be another triangle. You'll forget that they weren't part of the game at one point. Mm-hmm. But it's the same sort of deal.
Right. Yeah, very interesting. So I was telling her how so my instructor told me, he's like, don't even think about the next belt until you can confidently say you're the best at that belt level. And But it cracks me up that Danaher, you could argue, has multiple people at belts that are arguably the best in the world at that belt, but he still won't promote them. So it's I definitely agree both don't matter. And it always cracks me up when people say that they do matter. If you go to any Nogi gym, like pure Nogi gym, New Wave, 10th Planet, We went to your place last night.
Yeah.
At Violet Crown.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, we're all, when no one's wearing a belt,
Yeah.
I guess it doesn't really
Nobody
matter.
really
Right?
questions it. They're like, dude, well, because those guys are coming because they know, like, oh, Abe's going to teach you some good stuff. You know what I mean? And that's really the end of the day. Is I think that if we don't make a big deal out of belts cease to really matter, and then it becomes reputation and actual ability that is the main differentiator between who's a good teacher, who's not as good of a teacher, right? Because it's funny because there will be black belts who I'll hear like would charge like more than me for like a private or something, but I just know they don't have the accolades necessary to actually like teach, or they're not going to teach them the same value. Like I can teach a ton of stuff in an hour and I feel very confident about it, but these people, I don't know what they'll teach, or I'll hear the way other people teach privates, and it seems like all they do is roll with them for an hour. And I'm like, bro, you could get that in an open mat, and they could save money. I don't really know what fundamental understanding you're going to learn from this guy. I think it's just people want to feel like it's funny. You see this in dancing. So I dance as well, right? And there are a lot of people, but there's no belt ranking system in dancing. There's just instructor and student. So instructor is kind of like a pseudonym for I'm a black belt in dancing. And so you'll find a lot of people will kind of like want to like belt themselves by teaching a class as soon as possible, even if they're not ready for it. But they'll be like, the minute that somebody pays them $20, they're like, I'm an instructor. And it's the same thing. And it would be like that in jiu-jitsu. It kind of is like that. People want to teach a private. People want to teach it more than just for the money, but to legitimize their skill. Because they want to go up to some person who doesn't have a good understanding of jiu-jitsu and be like, I teach, I get paid. Yeah, I make money. But they're like paying them like $15 to teach them a crappy armbar. It's like, but that's the whole thing. So a lot of people like the notoriety. They want to be acknowledged for it. That's why nobody likes being a blue belt if they're 10 years in, because they'll be like, you know, I should be more than this. It doesn't match my current prestige. And, you know, us as being chimpanzees, basically, it's really important to us to be high up in the hierarchy if we feel like we deserve it. So,
Yeah. Color is important.
yes. Yeah. Color. I'll see color though.
Again, you're super accomplished, won multiple ADCC Opens, gold, medaling in the absolute, all within, again, a 5-year time period, a lot of it in this past year. So you can definitely say that you have competition success. So what would be your advice to someone who's looking to try one of these ADCC Opens, or maybe try the trials for their first time, or maybe someone who's already done the trials and they're not having success? Like what piece of advice would you give them to kind of level up their competition game?
Sure. I'd say learn the rules more than anything. Learn the freaking rules. Like the biggest differentiator, like there will be people who are like ADCC veterans and former champions or people who medaled or something like that. And I don't think they have a good understanding of the rules. The rules I do think seem a little strange at first because they're so different than the rest of them. But I find that they have a much more, in my opinion, if you understand what the rules are trying to optimize for, which I think is activity, action, they want to fight against stalling. They want people to, you know, they want to make jiu-jitsu fun to watch. If you start to understand the purpose of the rules, like what their intent is, you begin to understand how the rules work. Whereas it's not obvious to me what IBJJF's goal is. It doesn't seem like they're trying to encourage activity or action, because there's so many rules that I think discourage activity and action. Whereas I think if you start to understand initiations, you start to understand the fact that you can turtle to avoid getting scored on and stuff, I think it encourages these really dynamic like scrambles for points and make it extremely hard to score points. The boundaries basically don't mean anything because you can literally fight on top of a table in ADCC, which I think you could criticize as potentially dangerous. But at the same time, the alternative is you guys stop every 10 seconds because people want to use the boundaries as like a barrier. So that's kind of the trade-off, is you got to keep going, keep going, keep going. And it makes it so that jiu-jitsu is no longer this like skirmish of I'm going to shoot on you, and hopefully I take you down in bounds. It makes it so these guys can't use the boundaries. They have to actually be legitimately good at escaping under these pressured situations, although sometimes they're in unideal situations, which does happen, right? So I'd say learn the rules, watch people who win. If other people are winning, it's probably because they're doing something correct, either tactically or technically or something like that, and then mimic what they do. Like look at people who win or are good, and then copy what they do. That's pretty much what I can say, just as really basic things. So watch more tape, see who's winning the championships, and ask yourself, why are they winning? And if they keep doing it enough, it's not just because they're on steroids. It's not just because they're cheating or something like that. They can't get away with it forever. There has to be some aspect of it that's consistent throughout the whole thing, especially if they're beating other good people who you know are good. So
Yeah, yeah. Uh, man, I was just thinking about the language thing that you brought up earlier. It's so good, man. So real quick on the language, right? To being a good instructor. Now, what is your argument for the use of like learning the Japanese names for moves? Like, what do you think that? Because I feel like just my perception of it, I feel like we're kind of still using English and Japanese. So I
Sure.
honestly use all English.
That's because there's no real main head of jiu-jitsu that says this is the term for an Americana versus an American lock versus a key lock versus a figure four. You know what I mean? There are like a million names. Yeah, exactly. You're like, what are we doing here? For me, I guess I use the Japanese terms largely because that's the way I was taught and those are the terminologies. But I think once you learn to understand the Japanese terms, you find that they're actually the most like specific about it. I think if you want to call like a move a screwdriver, I don't see why you would call it that. But if you translated the Japanese terms into like an ashigarami, for example, it literally just means leg entanglement, and you can categorize all the ashigaramis as different types of ashigaramis, right? Obviously, it's a term that isn't normal because we typically speak English, so you could say that. And maybe you could make an argument that leg entanglement is a term that you should just use instead of maybe ashigarami. You'd say, oh, this is so Jujikatami means cross hold or cross pin. You could say cross pin instead, maybe. But the thing is that all these terms come from judo, and they were already there. They were terms that we go, like, you see judokas don't argue about this. Judokas don't be like, hey, why do we use the Japanese terms? It's just because this is judo and it's a Japanese originated sport. You use the terms. It's funny because in science, for example, whoever kind of like discovers it and comes up with it, we use those terms. So in science, you'll find a mixture of Greek, Latin, and German. It doesn't make any sense why we use why do we use German? Oh, it's because a German guy discovered it and innovated that. So we have like these specific German terms. So to me, I see it as, oh, you discovered it. We're just going to keep using that term. And judo basically discovered almost all the aspects that we use in jiu-jitsu. We just apply them differently. Like I'll very willingly use wrestling terms if it's the appropriate thing to use, right? If it's like, this is just what you call it, like a cow catcher or something, or an over-under from front headlock, like that makes sense. I'll use it. So I'm not against using that because there's also no Japanese term for it. Or there is, but I don't know it. Could be one of those things. But I'd say largely it's because of history. But it's funny because people will criticize calling it like an overhook or something, but then they'll be like, dude, or they'll criticize a jiu-jitsu term like uchimata or something like that, but they're like, bro, you got to use a whizzer. It's like, a whizzer's not intuitive at all. Like, it's basically not English. It's just you whiz it, bro. Like, you know what I'm saying? Or they'll come up with all these different names that are basically, why is twister doesn't teach me what a twister is, right? But if I understand that uchimata means a inner thigh throw, then I'm like, oh, okay, it's a throw from the inner thigh. You see what I'm saying? But there's actually an implicit explanation of what is going on there, whereas twister doesn't mean anything. So I would say that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Very interesting. But even because the Kasoto hook, that cartoon, it's like Kasoto is
and then
like
hook.
And then hook.
Yeah, and hook. It could just call it a Kasoto, I guess. But they add hook to just add explanation to it.
Interesting.
And so, but it's like, because you can call it Kasoto, and it's like, oh, I got the Kasoto here.
Yeah. I find
because they call it Osoto as well. There's Kosoto, Osoto, and all these other ones.
Yeah, Sotogari. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Because now that I'm teaching, I have to be very careful with the way that I describe things. Because at first I would just be like, yeah, this thing's got like 4 different names. You got Inside Senkaku, 411, Cross Ashi. It's like, it has all these names. And then now it's like, now that I'm teaching though, it's like, I got to make sure that these guys know how I see it. I can't be giving them a bunch of different turns, and then because I don't know what they'll latch on.
They don't know what they'll do. Yeah.
So I was like, you know what? We're just gonna stick with this is. Well, I see some people are now calling Ashi now Irimi Ashigarami.
Well, Irimi and Ashi, well, because they're all Ashigaramis, cross Ashi, outside Ashi,
it's all Ashi.
Reverse Ashi. They're all Ashigaramis, but Irimi means straight. So essentially, straight is like single leg X to people.
Right.
Like, so I don't think single leg X is at all an intuitive name because there's also X guard. So I'm just like, it doesn't explain the difference between it.
Yeah. Trying to explain the similarities between single leg X and an X guard is like, it's really not that similar.
No, it's not. So I just say, oh, this is Irimi Ashigarami.
Why not just Ashi though?
Well, Ashi is a general term. It's like, why don't we just call all humans and monkeys primates? But then you'll be like, well, which one are you talking about? You'll be like, you'll have gorillas, chimps, and humans, and you'll be like, then you look at a chimpanzee and that's a primate, and you'll be like, okay, and it's like, go get the primate, and you're like, which one? So if you just refer to everything as Ashi, hey, get an Ashi.
Well, Ashi's referring to the one to the most basic, right?
Yeah, they're usually referring to Arimi Ashigurami,
Right.
and that's just because it's so common that they've just called it there. Like, so for example, in Chinese, the word for food is fan, right? But the word fan means rice. So rice is so common that they just call all rice food. You know what I'm saying? It's like such a staple in their diet or whatever, ancient wise, that fan and rice and food are interchangeable terms. So too with the Ashi, is that Ashi is just, the Arimi is so common that they just call that Ashi. But that's just more of a colloquialism, a normal side effect of just talking. I don't think that's because John sat down and we're just going to call it. I think it just became practical, and people just, made everything more succinct rather than saying the entire full name. You have nicknames for things. Like, you're not going to call me Abraham Josiah Wolf La Montagne. You're like, that's Abe. You know what I mean? It would take too long.
Right.
Yeah. So brevity.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, last question, buddy, and then we'll wrap this thing up. Well, actually, I might have two questions. Another fun question. Is jiu-jitsu a fight?
Yes.
Yeah,
it's a type of fight. If boxing's fighting, then jiu-jitsu's fighting. But I wouldn't say it's the highest level of fight. MMA is the closest you'll get to an actual fight that's still a sport.
Or a street fight.
Yeah, street fight, war. War is fighting. Any aspect of fighting or combat, like in war, that's real fighting.
That's what I'm gonna do the next dummy that brings up street fights. I'm gonna say, no, war is actual.
War is the real fight. Like, seriously, that fight to the death is the most fighty fight.
Yeah.
Right. But I'd say, like, it's funny because a lot of people will talk about boxing, clearly a fight. But I think it's just because of the inherent appeal of it, like the violence, the history, because punching people in the face, oh, that looks like fighting.
Yeah.
But like, if you're on the ground and you're in side control or you're in reverse close guard or something like that, it's like, that's not fighting. That looks gay. Like, they'll be like, but I think in reality, what is the purpose of fighting? Like, oh, well, you're trying to go for like a knockout. You're trying to deal sufficient damage that this guy cannot continue anymore. Jiu-jitsu does the exact same thing. You just don't strike, you grapple. But in boxing, you just strike, you don't grapple. But does MMA cease to become fighting if a guy only strikes the entire match? Or the vice versa, if he only grapples the entire match? Like what we said, Hoist earlier, right? Hoist made his entire career off choking dudes. Did he suddenly stop fighting when he was strangling the guy? No, he was fighting still, right? So to me, I think it's a weird distinction that I think many MMA fighters and boxers want to be like, yeah, I'm a tough fighter because they enjoy getting hit in the head. Whereas I think jiu-jitsu people tend to be more cerebral oriented a lot of the time. And to be honest, a lot of them are not the most physically or mentally tough people. I think they couldn't handle getting punched in the face. But I do think that there is some truth to, oh, you're a guard puller, you're going to guard pull on a guy in a street fight? No, you're not going to. But a real submission grappler knows how to wrestle and does other things, where I think if you have all of the well-rounded skills necessary in submission grappling, you'll know how to take a guy down, mount him, and then you could also it's not that hard to just start throwing elbows.
Right.
Like, okay.
One that cracks me up though is like, if we got into a fight and I didn't throw a single punch, I picked you up and dropped you on your head, you're gonna tell everybody you're in a fight.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's why did Hoist stop fighting once he strangled a guy?
Yeah.
Not at all. He was fighting still.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like, bring it up.
If you're good at jiu-jitsu and you get into a match fight with another good jiu-jitsu person, like let's say in a competition, you're gonna feel like you were in a fight. Like every time I get out of a match with someone really good, I feel like I was in a fight. Like I'm literally beat the fuck up.
Yeah.
Most likely I hit in the head.
You could get blood, everything like that. It looks like you were in a fight. Yeah, for sure. But I think that's more of like an emotional answer, like to something like that. It's like it felt intense. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, but it's like, I think people just have this sort of almost like sacred treatment of the word fight, because they like to. It's like being called a warrior. I'm a warrior. I'm a samurai. Like, people be like, I'm a samurai, and I'm like, but these are the kind of dudes who have zero discipline. They wake up late. Like, they don't have any other thing, but they want to be like, I'm a samurai. I follow Kaizen. I have a Bushido code. And I was like, no, they just have a man bun and they do jujitsu and stuff like that, but they smoke weed 24/7, and like they think that they're like, they just want to be able to say they're in a martial art so that they can sound cool. But literally nobody finds that cool. Like, literally nobody. I don't think girls think it's cool when you tell them a martial artist, but you say you're like a fighter or a warrior, that's different. Warrior maybe seems a little weird because like, what do you have a sword and like a shield? But fighter sounds cool to a lot of people. Like it's just to simplify things. Like I'll do security for work sometimes, and if people ask me what I do, I don't tell them I'm a jiu-jitsu practitioner. I'll be like, they're like, do you fight? Yeah, I fight. But then I'll give the further explanation of I do jiu-jitsu specifically. Just keeps things easy. I got the mangled ears, the bruised up eyes, everything. I might as well be a fighter at that point, but I'm not an MMA fighter. So
Yeah. No, I definitely think jiu-jitsu is a fight. Anyway, I just wanted to get your opinion on that.
for sure, yeah.
And so, yeah, another question. If you had to pick a spirit animal, what would it be?
You're not gonna like my answer. Human.
Yeah.
Yeah, human. That's my spirit animal. Like humans are awesome. We make pizza. We write love poetry. We can dance. We can sing. We can also invent amazing weapons. Like everybody's like, oh, I'm a bear. Like I'm a big old burly bear. If I couldn't say human, I guess I'd probably say like a wolf's pretty cool. Mostly just because
use the wolf emoji. There you go.
yeah, well, it's my other. I have two last names, so I have the Mountain, but then I have Wolf. So Wolf comes from my mom's side of the family, and so I've always been called Wolf as like one of my is my secondary family name. So it's just Wolf the Mountain or La Montagne Wolf or whatever you want to say. So it's just one of those things. But I'd probably say Wolf has a lot of human-like qualities, but I think what we kind of like about dogs or canine animals is essentially they embody some of the purest qualities we like humans to have, like loyalty, teamwork. There's that alpha wolf kind of thing where they're these strong, independent kind of like leaders, but they're fair and just. They protect the family. They're very family-oriented animals, which is why I think humans find them appealing.
Interesting.
So I'd say wolf maybe would be a cool comparison or something I'd want to be like if we go with the sort of the stereotypical virtues of that, right? Or you could just be like, I'm a lion, not a sheep, or I'm a shark, and the mat is my ocean. Like those are the typical animals that I think most jiu-jitsu guys will be like aligned with. But I don't know, wolf's a pretty cool one.
Yeah, no, wolves are legit for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so last question. What have you seen?
A lot of last questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the last one. What would you say, like for you, is like this thing that you've noticed maybe when you first started wrestling or when you first got into the PhD program and you're going through college? Like what attribute have you noticed that like helps you in all the skills that you do? Like this one thing you can rely on, it will help you figure out shit, and no matter what it is.
Persistence. More than anything is just like developing some ability to just kind of like endure shit. Like you can say being smart's a pretty important quality. It is, but a lot of less intelligent people, while being consistent, can get better than any person that has this natural ability to. And so sometimes the smartest people I know do the dumbest things. Like because they're so smart. Like I'll know some people that are rather close to me that are almost too smart for their own good, but because they don't have that almost stupid ability to just endure things, they never accrue enough wisdom to make good decisions. They think that they can outsmart wisdom and experience, and they think that they're too good to almost have to learn certain lessons. And because of that, they will keep getting hit in the face. They'll be like, well, you see, if I just misangle my blah, blah, blah. And they have such pride associated with their keen naturalistic abilities that they'll never endure just hardship and understand that this is just sometimes mental toughness is a big thing, just being tough. Sometimes the most strategic and smart thing to do is to just deal with stuff. You know what I mean? But a lot of people today, I think, will use the technology of their natural attributes of their situation as a way of avoiding like actual difficulties. But it's really kind of like the ability to just like say you're on bottom and mount, getting my face crushed is sometimes the best thing to do. Like, I'm just going to like, no, all right, you can keep trying to smother me. I know this isn't going to get me. And all I have to do is just go to some other place in my head where I'm like, just give me the time and then I'm going to kip out of here. And then I'm going to get a leg lock on you and I'm like, haha. I hope it was worth making me suffer for 30 seconds so I can break your foot. You know what I mean? That's the trade-off. But being willing to make those sacrifices and willing to tolerate it and just know I can do this. Same thing with like, one thing I think if there was a skill that I got, like a lot of people would be like, Abe, how much wrestling helped you to get good at jiu-jitsu? And it's like, wrestling helped me, but not in ways that you might think are obvious. I think more than anything as a life skill, it gave me tenacity, which I think maybe is what I'm really trying to say right now. I have the ability to kind of go to a place and just keep moving forward, even if it's slowly, But I think whereas a lot of people will get so debilitated by some bad thing happening that they'll get off the trail and then they'll take a break 6 months. They'll get hurt and they won't study. They don't care that much. But whereas I'll make the effort to just kind of keep going because I know I'm not naturally talented enough to just mode something with my brain or something like that. Like, so if you memorize enough facts, you will seem smart to people because they'll be like, that's what smart people would do, is know stuff. So it's like, you know, you can fake intelligence a lot of the time by just understanding or memorizing what it sounds like to understand a concept. So I think that all that shows is that persistence, willpower, and just pushing through something is really what we're looking for. And it's some semblance of natural ability. You can make up for things a lot by your decision making. If you make good decisions, you learn how to make good decisions, that'll help you through everything. So tenacity and just keep going. Like, keep marching forward and you'll get somewhere eventually. You know, I'm just going to keep talking, but essentially, if you like aim, like they say that cheesy line where they'll be like, you aim for the stars, you'll hit the moon, or something like that. If you essentially,
you'll land amongst them.
yeah, if you have such a lofty goal of like, I'm going to become an ADCC champion, or I'm going to become the greatest grappler of all time, and you're sincere about that and you're really trying, maybe you don't have the natural attributes to allow you to get there. Maybe you have to be a phenom on top of being a tenacious person, where you'll get pretty far. You know what I mean? Yeah. Maybe you will be like a Gordon Ryan, but maybe you could be a really good somebody. I mean, you could be a new you.
Like a Jim Miller.
Yeah, well, yeah. You could be a really high level person that people will refer to, and maybe they'll say, yeah, Gordon Ryan is the GOAT, but that one guy was really good. You'll be that but one guy. But that but one guy probably tried to be the best at some point and really generally gave his best foot forward. So be tenacious, you know, have ambitions, make big goals for yourself, and be like, you know, it's okay to be a little unrealistic if it motivates you to get out of bed.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, dude. I really like that. Jimmy House's podcast is out right now, and he was saying for him it was intellectual ability, and so it's funny that you kind of had like the opposite.
Yeah. The scientist is like, be fucking tough. But like the giant jack dude, be smart. Yeah. I love Jimmy though. He's such a good person.
Yeah. No,
he's got that Dwayne the Rock Johnson vibe, but he's this like jacked, like, hey, be nice to people and give them hugs. And it's just like, I love Jimmy though. He's such a kind person.
Yeah. But anyway, dude, you had some great answers. I really like that we got deep into the science stuff, and I appreciate you coming on.
Hey, good to see you, buddy. Thanks.
Appreciate y'all for tuning in.
Thank you.